All right, contracts and negotiation. These two for me go hand in hand. And like everything else, I will start by saying a contract is a tool. It's a means to the end to get your artwork done and into the world, right? So the contract serves the art rather than the other way around. And then also, I'm not a lawyer. This doesn't constitute legal advice for specific situations. Get a lawyer. Okay. What is this stuff? Which is a phrase my father says to my mother about her cooking on the regular, enough that it's a joke. So I use it all the time. A contract is a written or spoken agreement, especially one concerning employment, sales, or tenancy, that is intended to be enforceable by law. It's a voluntary, so these are all important pieces of a contract, right? Voluntary, deliberate, and legally binding agreement between two or more competent parties. And we'll break down what each of those elements mean, because you have to have each of those components: competency, voluntary, and deliberate. Contracts are usually written, but may be spoken or implied, and generally have to do with employment, sale, or lease, or tenancy. A contractual relationship is evidenced by an offer, acceptance of the offer, and a valid, legal, and valuable consideration. And then each party to a contract acquires rights and duties relative to the rights and duties of other parties. So these are two super generic contract definitions. What it means: it's a legally binding agreement that all parties enter into purposefully, willingly, and without coercion. So that's that voluntary piece, is that you cannot, if you are blackmailed into a contract, it's legally invalid, right? You have to voluntarily enter into it on purpose. You can't accidentally, you can't be taken advantage of, and you have to make it clear that you're both purposefully entering into this contract, and everybody has to agree. The contract is just the official document saying you'll do the project or the thing or the whatever together. It's just a necessary tool you need as part of a partnership to do something great. Okay, contracts that might be legally binding: a verbal or handshake agreement, email exchanges. If somebody pays you for something and you don't have a contract and you cash the check, or you take whatever non-monetary benefit, that's legally, usually implies acceptance of the contract. Or if you just do the work, that's not always true. It's hazy, right? This is why you don't do any of those things. You write it down. You get it written down. Story time recap. Right. So I always like to talk about contracts. The first and last time I did not get a contract for work, I was 23. I was a lighting designer. And a friend of mine was stage managing a play at a community theater, and the community theater had just been taken over by a new executive director. That executive director is somebody that I knew pretty well. I went to college with, we were friends, and their lighting designer quit. So I came in at the last minute as an emergency replacement, didn't get a contract, was like, I know everybody, it's gonna be fine. I know I'll get paid. It's just because I'm coming in at the last minute. Did the work, even though I was very clear with them that I could not come to strike to like take down the lights at the end of the performance because I had something else booked, but I was an emergency replacement. They decided that they weren't going to pay me the second half of my fee because I didn't come to strike. I didn't get a contract. I got screwed by my friend. That person is now like still in my world. this was in another state. He has risen to the point that he's in the like state arts agency realm, although he doesn't work at a state arts agency. So I still have to deal with him on the regular. So if you think that that does not color those interactions, yeah, it's rough. Anyway, so I lost out on what was for me at that point a significant amount of money. I think it was like $300 or something. But also, you know, it's 15 years down the road and that relationship is damaged forever as we both have to interact regularly in professional settings. So here's the thing about that story. Every single person I know, particularly in the performing arts, has at least one I didn't get a contract story. If you don't have one yet, you probably will. So always get a contract. Here it says, even if it's a friend, even if it's somewhere you've worked before, even if it's a last minute favor, even if it's a small amount of money or work, I would say, especially if it's a friend, especially if it's all those things, right? Because the contract protects both of you by making everything, all of the expectations really, really clear, right? It eliminates the ambiguity in what you're doing and why and what the relationship is. Here is a giant list of arts-related things that you will want to have a contract for. Some of them are super obvious, some of them are not. Consigning your work, a loan of your artwork to someone or a gallery or a place or whatever, licensing, commissions, teaching, an artist residency, grants or funding. Like we have a grant contract when you get a grant from RISCA. Model release forms, collaborations with other artists, even if money isn't changing hands, because you want to talk about intellectual property, deadlines, when stuff is going to get done, right? It doesn't need to be a contract full of legalese. Working with an agent or a gallery or someone that's going to represent you in some way and sell your work. Events, and this isn't just performers, you know, having a like contract and a rider for a touring musician. This is like all events, art sales, fairs, craft shows, you know, that sort of thing. So it's everything. There's a zillion different kinds of contracts. Don't be afraid of them. Okay, before you start to create the contract, the first and most important thing that you need is mutual respect with the person you're entering the contract into. I would recommend, you know, we see all of these negotiation tactics about like, you know, you should be standing up and they should be sitting down and you should be a shark. Like I will always and forever fight against that method of working with people, because it starts from a place of animosity. It starts from a place of trying to take advantage of the other person or assume you're going to be taken advantage of, rather than starting from a place where, you know, particularly in the arts world, like you want to make something good happen. The contract is writing down how that's going to happen, right? So starting from a place where you know you want to work together, and that you're on the same team is really helpful. A solid understanding of shared goals. What do you both want to get out of this? Why is it valuable? Why is it a thing you want to do? A clear description of the project, the sale, the commission, the whatever. You know, you should know what you are both agreeing to before the contract, right? The contract comes after you've made these decisions. Everyone's specific roles and responsibilities. So the contract is not just to hold one person accountable. It says, you know, you will do this in exchange for this, or this person will do this, this person will do this, this person will do this. Sometimes this person will do this is pay you, right? A budget, specific outcomes, and a timeline. So in contract world, it's called terms. So this could be things like length of an agreement with a gallery, like they'll represent you for 1 year. This could also be for a teaching artist residency, you know, or a commission. You'll get them the first round of sketches on this date. They'll have critique, and you'll do a second round by this date. This is when the residency dates are going to be. This is when you'll have X, Y, and Z, right? You want to make those deadlines really clear. You want to include on there, this is another, put this in your contract, how long they have to pay you, right? So if you need to be paid within 30 days of receipt of the invoice or something like that. Elements in a contract include the specific goods and services from each party. So I, Molly Flanagan, will teach 11 sessions of the Business Basics Boot Camp and have one office hour every week for the time period. I will also provide email support. In exchange, you will provide a Zoom account and X number of dollars. Exclusivity. This is not in every contract. It's very, very common for touring artists or gallery representation. So for touring artists, a lot of it is, so when I worked at a music venue, it was 3 weeks and 100 miles. So you would not, the exclusivity was the musician band group would not have another show within 3 weeks and 100 miles of that show that you were booking at. That's so that, you know, basically like somebody doesn't book a show at one venue and then book one for the next night, you know, a mile down the road, and the first one is on a Thursday, the second one's on a Friday, the first one's $30, the second one's $20, right? Like, you know what's going to happen there. So exclusivity, galleries have geographic exclusivity sometimes as well. So some galleries will say, yeah, we'll represent you here. You cannot have other gallery representation within New England. I would, for y'all visual artists, be very careful of completely exclusive gallery representation, because a gallery in Boston is generally not serving, you know, LA art buyers. You want to be able to have gallery representation and have your work in galleries in multiple different geographic locations, right? That's something hopefully all y'all visual artists will be navigating in your lives, but who knows? Term, which is the length of the agreement. So it depends on if it's a project or if it's something like gallery representation or an agent or licensing, is like it lasts 1 year. In general, shorter terms with option to renew is better. It protects you in case, it protects both parties, right? In case it's just not working out, in case you don't like each other, in case something better comes along, you know, whatever. Payment, spelled out, dates of payment, installments, exactly how much. Termination. So what happens, how and why either party, so either you or the person hiring you, the other person you're entering into the contract with, can terminate the contract, and what happens. Like, do you still get paid a deposit based on, like, if they cancel your show a week ahead, do you still get some amount of payment for that? If you cancel, what happens? You know, you want to work out all of those details, all of those what ifs. And then particularly for things like commissions and work for hire and that other work, you want to put in there ownership of IP and actual property. So this can include a lot of things. We had a mural installed, a local artist did a mural in a tech company in downtown Providence called eMoney. And in the contract, we put that the artist retains the copyright to the image, even though it's physically there in their building and it was a commission. But she retains the copyright, but they can use it in their marketing. So they could use photographs of it for their stuff, but they couldn't sell those things, right? There was some monetary stuff, but she could if she wanted to. This ownership of IP is like, there's one really interesting contractual piece. The Fearless girl that got put in front of Wall Street next to the bull, that artist actually has made a number of those. It's like cast, right? And the company that bought the Fearless Girl and installed it there, like, lost their minds and were like, no, we own that now. And she was like, no, you own this one. It was a whole thing of, you know, big corporations are what they are. They have their own goals. So make sure those things are written down, right, in a contract. Okay. These are the 3 elements to making a contract be legal. The first one is the offer and acceptance. Offer and acceptance occurs when the contract is signed by both parties voluntarily. This may not be influenced by outside factors. That being said, performance of the contract terms can also be considered acceptance. So if you just do the contract, if you fulfill it, you are accepting it. If the other party requests a change in the terms before signing, they can negotiate with a counteroffer. So don't sign, don't accept, don't start doing the work until you have a signed, agreed upon contract, because by starting to do the work, you're accepting the contract. And you know, all of this lies in sort of a legally hazy area, right? Where some lawyers, some judges would have different interpretations of it. So it's always, you know, like, you might be able to defend it in court, but it would be better if you didn't have to go to court because it was very clearly written down in the contract, right? So it's protecting you from getting to the point where you have to fight it in some way, because that's expensive. Consideration. That means that each party must offer something of value, right? We live in a capitalist world. So, but that means that can include an interest, a right, a benefit, a loss, a responsibility. It could be effort, it could be money, it could be a service, it could be a promise. If consideration does not exist, one party is offering the other party a gift, right? If it's not mutually beneficial, if you're not both offering something, it's not a contract, it's a gift. So if you entered into a commission for somebody and you said, well, I'm actually just going to do this for free, I'm going to gift it to you, I don't need anything in return. That's not a contract. You wouldn't need a contract. Your contract would not be valid if you had one. It would be a gift, right? But if you built in, like, I'm going to do this commission and I'm not going to charge you money, but you're going to model for me for free and you're going to post it on your social media and tag me to help me get business, that would count as offering something of value. So you would want a contract, and that contract would be legally binding. Competence and capacity is that you must be legally competent and over the age of 18 to enter into a contract and for it to be legal. So, you know, legal competency is a whole other thing that I will not pretend to know anything about, other than, like, watching Britney Spears have conservatorship, right? But, like, she can't enter into a contract. Her conservator has to, because she's been ruled in not legally competent. Kids, their parents' legal guardians have to be the one that signs the contract, right? A kid cannot enter into a legally binding contract. However, if you're 18, exactly, you're no longer a kid and you can. Okay, questions so far? Cool. Force majeure and the pandemic. So force majeure is a force or event that cannot be reasonably anticipated or controlled. It is extraordinary and unforeseen. Sometimes this is replaced in contracts as acts of God, which ends up being, that meaning ends up being more about weather events and less about anything else, right? Both of these, if they don't have definitions other than those phrases, are really vague, and that bit a lot of people in the butt, a lot of everybody in the butt, right, when we had to shut everything down. This is something that we're not used to thinking about or working on. It's something that we all put into contracts with and just are like, yeah, okay, we have to put that in there. Now we're all thinking about that because it's here, and there's a lot of legal uncertainty around whether a pandemic or governmental regulations shutting something down count as a force majeure. So what a force majeure is in a contract is a clause that specifically allocates risk between the parties and explains what happens if either or both parties are unable to fill their duties due to something crazy, like a pandemic that shuts everything down. But also that might not count, depending on the language in your contract. Okay, this text is a little small because there's a lot of it. So there's been a ton of legal dialogue. I did a lot of Googling over the last couple of days about force majeure and artists. The more specific you can be in the contract about what examples of that, of force majeure include, the better. Because some lawyers and judges interpret it just as weather events. Some include any naturally caused event, which would include a pandemic. That would not include the government regulations as a result of the pandemic, right? Isn't that weird? Most definitions of force majeure and act of God do not include man-caused events, things like labor strikes, war, terrorism, like other things that could shut you down. A lot of the performing arts touring contracts I've seen have specific language in them that include things like labor strikes. Most don't have things that include things like war or terrorism, though that might be different in New York. I don't think I've ever actually worked on or seen a contract post 9/11 for an event in New York. But you know, these are the things that come up when everything gets canceled because of crazy stuff that isn't just a tornado. So the newer recommendations are in your force majeure clause are that you add a phrase like that includes things like governmental orders and regulations. That way, that counts. So for example, like the pause would get you, the pause that we're in here in Rhode Island would be a governmental regulation that would allow the parties to exit the contract, right? Any event beyond the parties' control that makes performance impossible, infeasible, or unsafe. And again, you know, like the more specific you can be, the better, because even that, you know, some folks are deeming attending performances or going to a restaurant as unsafe and some are not. So there will always be some wiggle room in there, but there's way less wiggle room that the pandemic would count in this description than just force majeure or acts of God, right? And then make it really clear what happens if that clause needs to be used, right? What happens if the contract gets terminated because something totally crazy happens? Does the contract just dissolve and all obligations from both parties are removed? So that means nobody gets paid, but nobody's obligated to pay. None of, you know, all of the things you've agreed to are gone. Does someone still get paid some amount? Do the terms or the timeline extend and the obligation happens later? So do you just postpone the show? And then what are the specific obligations, both financial and performing the agreed upon services or duties, if the clause is needed? So the more information you can have there to protect yourself, the better. So, you know, like if a school shuts down, but you have a teaching artist residency book the next week, do you have in your clause that you do the artist residency virtually and then you are obligated to do it, but they're still obligated to pay you? You also have to consider, is that something you can pivot to that fast? Because it's not easy to turn around a week-long artist residency from being teaching artist residency from being in person to virtual that quickly, right? Just some protections and also clarity about what the heck happens if something crazy happens. My anticipation is that there will be a lot more information, clarity, focus on these kinds of clauses in the future once we start doing stuff in the arts again, particularly stuff in person. And then the other option is to add another clause, another paragraph to the contract in addition to force majeure that is really more specific and includes pandemics and particularly governmental regulations. And then in the spirit of, you know, entering in that you're trying to do something great together from a place of mutual trust and respect, I would say when you're writing these exit clauses, make sure that there's some sort of shared risk and shared loss between the two parties, that it doesn't all fall on one party. Sometimes that's really, really hard to do. And we're going to talk about non-monetary negotiation tactics and stuff in a minute. But I think just thinking of yourselves, of you as a team with the other party and how you can share both the risk and the responsibility and the reward is good. Okay, questions about that? Okay. The good news is one of the best articles that I read about force majeure and the pandemic and artists was written by Luke, who is our guest from last week. So I'll put the link to that on the page, as well as a whole bunch of contract example links. Like I'm not sharing any today, but I'm gonna put like a wide variety of them on the website tomorrow, just so you can look at them. Okay, writing a contract. In the same way that when nonprofits are starting and they think their bylaws need to be like full of legalese and indecipherable to like a common person, many people think contracts have to be the same way, and that is not true. There's some things that have to be in legalese, at least a little bit, but for the most part, you should be able to read a contract and understand what your rights and responsibilities are, right? Like it should make sense to everybody involved. You know, you still want to have a lawyer look it over, but you want to be able to know what it is and what it's saying without a lawyer looking it over. That goes to being on the same page, having like clear expectations, right? If they're in so many layers of legalese that you can't understand what they are, then what's the point of having those shared expectations? Many organizations will have a standard one that they'll either like just drop your name in for your project or whatever you're doing. Some don't. The bigger and more hierarchical the organization, the more complex and restricted the contract and the contract process will be. This is particularly true of like government funders. Like we can't alter our grant contract at all. Like, but and for federal government, it's even more intense. But typically, even if they have a standard contract to start with, you can do some alterations. Even handwritten alterations that are initialed will become legally binding. And then have a lawyer look it over, one that works for you, not the other party. You know, even if it's just like, if particularly not, you know, you probably don't need to do this for every single contract, but if it's like sizable one, if it's the first one, You know, either try and find a pro bono lawyer or just have a 30-minute chunk of time, right? Pay for that. And then, you know, Google is your friend, like everything. There's a zillion examples of contracts on the Google. Don't just look at one, look at more than one source. And then have some examples around. Ask your friends to share theirs. Ask, you know, whoever you know that's doing work like you. And I don't mean like genre or discipline. I mean like, okay, I'm a musician. I want to see your like other contracts with like record labels, with, you know, performance venues, with agents, with et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, with graphic designers who are doing your cover art. Have some examples around. And I would not wait to gather those. I would do like that as part of your homework, is like, just ask your friends if they have sample contracts and like feel free to share yours. The more we talk and share about this, the better artists will be, right? This is the, you know, our fear of talking about money and the legal behind how the sausage gets made is a tool of the patriarchy and white supremacy. And that extends very, very much to contracts, right? You should know what things other people are getting so that you can make sure you're, you know, getting your fair share, right? Be prepared to go through more than one draft, even if the other, you know, the other party is resistant or just wants to get it done quickly. Like, this is a legally binding document. Don't let them push you into a deadline, right? Go through more than one draft, make some concessions, ask for some things. Feel free, please feel free to take a day to look at it or think about it before signing, particularly if you're like feeling unsure about some of the things you promised to do or things you gave up. And make sure it protects you as an artist. This is intellectual property, this is money, this is time. You know, particularly, like, there are some wonderful things that you can add in that are not monetary that might be helpful. You know, I'm thinking about things like, I used to stage manage a lot of youth theater with kids, and I would get parents calling and emailing me at like 6 or 7 in the morning and expecting me to answer and respond. I'm like, I was in rehearsal with your kid until 11 p.m. This is not my full-time job. I'm absolutely not going to answer your phone call at 6:30 in the morning. And I do not feel bad about that. But like, putting that in the contract and making it clear is a good boundary. Protects you, and it also clarifies things for them, sets the right expectation. Okay. Any other stuff about writing it before we shift into like talking about negotiation? All right. So the first step to negotiation, particularly in the arts world, in my opinion, is to focus on the common goal among all the parties and start from a place of collaboration. You know, there's always going to be the odd party that you're trying to negotiate with, you're trying to make a contract with, who is trying to take advantage of you. But for the most part, that is absolutely not true. Yeah. Record companies are, it's as we're seeing more and more like megastars talk about just how much control record companies have over their music, because of the contracts they signed, particularly at the beginning of their career. You know, I'm thinking like Taylor Swift doesn't own her masters, right? Which is, it's very common for artists who are signed to record labels to not own their masters. But then they're totally subject to like somebody being like, no, you can't play that. I own this. I'm going to sell it. Owning original recordings, like it, a lot of those issues are some of the main drivers that, you know, folks like Amanda Palmer turn to crowdfunding recordings, because then they own the intellectual property, all of the intellectual property at the end, rather than a record company owning some and the sound engineer owning some. And, you know, so it's these contracts, whew, also $2,000. Yeah. And it's Sony. Yeah. When you're negotiating with Sony, do not always assume that they're trying to take advantage of you. Like, I feel like if you're talking to like an art museum or like City Arts or a school or somebody who's hiring you to do a commission, like they're gonna be wanting the same things and, you know, on your team and not wanting to take advantage of you. A record company, their goal is to make money. You know, their goal is not the art. So that's an exception to starting from a place of collaboration. I'm glad you negotiated up to more than 2K. Okay, so before you go into the room or Zoom or write the email, know your goal and the absolute minimum that you need in order to enter into whatever this is. The minimum and the goal don't always have to be financial, right? They don't always have to be monetary. It doesn't always have to be a number, but it has to be like, you know, I want to make sure I'm protected in this way. I want to make sure that I retain the copyright. I want to make sure, you know, all of those things. Think about the values and interests for all parties other than money, because those are more easily negotiable often than the actual dollars, because often you're dealing with a very limited set budget. And remember that this is a business agreement. Do your best to keep your emotion out of it. This is particularly important for all of us in the arts, because it's so often that it's like you're writing a contract with somebody, entering into an agreement with someone you've known for 15 years and is your friend, and you're going to go have a beer with them next week. But like right now, you're trying to make sure they pay you fairly, right? It's always a little bit messy. So try and remember that it's separate. And then do your research, get an idea of their budget, what they have paid people in the past. If you have friends or acquaintances that have done similar work for them, find out what their contract was like, find out how much they got paid. You know, it's sort of the same thing as a person whose job hunt was entirely in government and nonprofit. You know, it's the equivalent of like checking out a nonprofit's 990 before you do the interview to like see that they're, you know, not going to close in the next 6 months, and also to find out how much their current ED gets paid. You know, and that way you can go in knowing what's reasonable, because it's possible that they literally just don't have the budget to offer you what you need to make, and that's not a bad thing. It's not a bad thing to say no when they don't have the money, right? Like, you have to value yourself, but you also have to value them. And saying you can't do something is instead of like trying to figure out a way to do it and then half-assing it, you know, saying no is sometimes the best for everyone. But if you have all of these things ready to go, you know what you want, you know when you'll walk away, and you know you have some idea of what they're going to be able to offer, what they've offered in the past, and what they want, you'll be much more ready to like pivot and collaborate and work together for something that works for both of y'all. Okay. So I also recommend talking about contracts, you know, sort of the same way y'all approach art making, like asking what if. Bring your whole self into the room, because sometimes there are things that will benefit you that are non-monetary that are really important. There's an artist who teaches at RISD, and his work is very hard to photograph, and it's all temporary, right? And he frequently exhibits in like university galleries and such that can't pay him for the work, right? They're not buying the work, it's temporary work, and they can't afford to pay him what it will actually cost. So he frequently writes in to his contracts that they'll hire a photographer or they'll use their staff photographer, and he'll get access to like both edited and unedited images for his portfolio. And that's, you know, like for a lot of artists, particularly artists that have three-dimensional, difficult to photograph work, that's huge. That's a huge monetary, that translates to a huge monetary value. So think about other things that will help you support your goals, get you to where you want to go. Bring your full creativity. Bartering, you know, we talked about bartering. Bartering is great. Exchange services, exchange goods. Ask the what if questions. Invent and ideate without committing. So, you know, brainstorming, bouncing stuff off the wall. And then discuss interests and values, because you can see what overlaps. Okay, Glassdoor has salary info. What website would I suggest to get accurate pricing references? Artwork, art pricing in general is really hard, y'all. I get asked how to price artwork, how to price teaching artist time, how to price all of the different things that folks do for income as artists. Like there's going to be some magic formula, and there is not. There's a group called, oh, is it just Wage? There's a couple of different sort of scientific, not scientific, formulaic ways to price artwork. I don't like those. I think it really depends on where you're at in your career, how much you need to make, how much the other person has to offer. So the best way to get accurate pricing references is to ask people to look at how much other people are charging for work that's comparable. You know, there isn't an easy way, but it starts with your budget, and it starts with knowing how much you need to make in order to like stay alive, right? Graphic Artist Guild, I know that, I think it's just called Wage. I'll try and find out. Hold on. Yes, it is just called Wage. Working artists and the greater economy, it's Wage for Work. And they have some stuff on pricing that's really good. Oh, nope, that's not what I was thinking of. That's something else. Anyway, I'll find it. There's two main ways of pricing that are formulaic that are out there on the internet. And one of them is like a per square inch of your artwork, which I find that like makes me physically uncomfortable, but it works for some people. And the other one is less about like how big it is and about other considerations. But I'll find those two things and I'll put them in on the Business Basics website. Okay, discuss interests and values, because there might be really creative solutions that are non-monetary. And also discussing what brings you together will help you build that common ground that will help you execute a good project together, right? Because remember that at the end of the contract, you have to work with this entity, person, group, etc. So your goal is to find common ground. Your goal is for everybody to leave happy. Okay, decision. Develop shared criteria and pressing interests for each party. So know what is the most important and know how you're going to measure how it's going. Work together to co-create a concrete proposal, finalize all of the details, and then take a break. Step back, walk away for a day and don't think about it, and then come back. And if it still feels good or right to you, then it's probably good or right. But give yourself some space. Don't go straight, you know, and it's the same way in like art making, right? Is you don't work, decide it's done, walk away and never look at it again. And it's done. You walk away for a little bit and then come back and see if it's done. At least that's how I did when I was a practicing artist. And then you actually have to do the thing, right? So follow through, work together to proactively protect the project and the agreement, right? It's in everybody's best interest that the thing gets done as outlined in the contract and y'all work together as outlined. Imagine potential challenges and their solutions, and then do it, right? On both sides. Do the thing, do it well, do it within the boundaries of the contract. Because there, you know, I always encourage artists to have multiple streams of revenue. Many artists have work that they do that supports their passion art. So make sure when you're doing the thing, if it's one of those things that you're just doing so you can make the money to support the other thing, do it well, but also don't do it too well, right? Don't spend too much time on it. Make sure you have space for all of the other things in your life. I feel like I'm going really fast. Is it okay? Okay, negotiation tips. Listen more than you talk. Concede slowly. So don't give away the store. Don't come right back with a reduced offer. Think about it. Think about alternatives to conceding. Think about other ways to get what you need. Know what your priorities are and make sure you stand true to those. Try and figure out what their priorities are and why, because then you can come to some more creative compromises. Think outside the box, find compromises outside of money, whether that's, you know, photographing your work, whether that's office space, whether that's some sort of barter situation, whether, you know, whatever that out of the box compromise is. If their budget doesn't allow you to get what you need, and you both still want to do the project, think about other ways to make it worth it. And then, you know, a lot of folks start with the hardest, most contentious things. Don't do that. Start with the easiest stuff. That way you'll have built up a rapport, a shared lexicon, a process around those agreements and those conversations. And you have some ground, you know, you have some solid ground to build on. Like, okay, we've already agreed on this stuff, so we can get there on the harder thing. But also, you know how the other person is going to be, you know, you figured out your rapport is not the right word, but you figured out how to be with them and how to figure stuff out. And then, as always, the most important thing is to value yourself and your intellectual property, right? Your work and your time and your skill have value. Just because somebody else will do it for free, don't you do it for free. Don't you do it for less. Get what you need and be willing to walk away and know when that is. I think this is my last slide, y'all. This is what I meant. I think I'm going too fast. Okay, contracts. Google is your friend. I'll always say that forever and ever. Like, Google is your friend. Check out resources from the Rhode Island State Bar Association. The Rhode Island State Bar Association has low-cost and pro bono lawyer matching services. Most lawyers have some sort of service commitment, right? And they mostly do that through the bar association. So the Rhode Island has a bar association. It's a little bit buried. They technically have a VLA, but it's not actually really in operation. And it's really just like about lawyer matching. But they also have some general contract resources. Take your time in making decisions. It helps remove the pressure and the urgency and also the intense emotion to just get things done. So don't start the contract the day it needs to be done. And then please share resources, ideas, examples, talk about money with your peers. One thing I might be really interested in is like some sort of wiki or even Google Drive that's like publicly accessible to everyone, where folks can put contracts and put like pricing and put how much they're getting paid for places. Like, there's been a lot of like big spreadsheets that have gone around in particularly like the theater and performing arts world in the last couple of years, talking about salaries and wages and how much folks get paid, to work towards pay, with the goal of working towards pay equity. I'm very in favor of that. I participated in a lot of them. Many of them are Googleable, so this wouldn't be like artwork pricing, but it would be your services pricing. That sort of stuff, that sort of sharing, particularly sharing broadly nationally, and with folks outside your immediate circle, in some way that has space, is like just so that you can't measure that, right? That support of each other and like knowing how much stuff should cost. Yeah, Jim says, I don't recall who I got this from, but there's one school of thought that encourages getting rid of clients who don't value you because they take time and energy away from working with clients that do value your work. So my mom was a CPA, and I worked for her for a couple of years, and one of my favorite things she did was at the end of every tax season, she would gather up all of her staff from like, the secretary all the way up to her, the boss, and they would pick 2 clients that they wanted to fire because they were not worth it. And like that sort of, that sort of buy-in, she had folks, and most of the people she hired were seasonal just for the tax season, but those people came back, to work for her for 20 or 30 years, even though they probably could have made money somewhere else, because they felt like they were taken care of and they were valued and they were heard, and that their employer cared more about them than the like jerk client who'd yelled at them. So yes, absolutely that, Jim. I'm a huge, I don't get to do that because I'm a public servant. I work for the government. I have to serve the jerks. But y'all don't, right? Y'all can take care of yourselves and set boundaries and say no. And I encourage you to. $5:00, too fast again. I think I underestimate how many questions y'all will have sometimes. Do you have thoughts, feelings about contracts and supporting each other, and what questions do you have? What answers do you have?
I think I'll just say that there are some useful networks based on whatever your particular practice is. I'm in a few Facebook groups that are particularly focused on like the areas that I would be making contracts in, and there's tons of those out there, whether it's Facebook or something. There are some off social media forums of various kinds. So if you're not already in some kind of national or international like networks where people are asking and answering each other's questions, I recommend that, because it's whenever I have something that's like sort of off, or something I'm puzzling over, it's a good place to go, and it's a nice way to contribute to like people who have less experience. So that's a recommendation I have in terms of figuring out pricing, dealing with issues, like if you have a weird client and you're just like, I'm really stressed, can I talk to someone? Yeah.
Totally. And I'll say, like in the music world, there's, and it's like gotten traction in the regular world now, that there's like the very famous Van Halen, no certain color M&Ms in their rider. And, people gave them so much shit for that, but that wasn't the purpose, right? It wasn't that they cared about the M&Ms. It was that they had the biggest touring rig that had ever gone out. And they were running into venues who were not properly or safely dealing with the set and the lights and the sound. And so they put in the rider the thing about the M&Ms, because when they could tell immediately when they got to the green room if that venue had read the rider with attention to detail. The thing I find funny as a person who like worked at a music venue is that the person that is taking care of the hospitality portion of the rider normally is totally different, separate than the person taking care of the tech rider. Like I would do the, like, even in our, you know, I worked at a 300 seat venue, and we had one person that would advance the tech stuff and one person that would advance the hospitality stuff, even though it was one rider. And like we shared an office, but yeah, I mean, like that's a really creative protection that they built in. I think that's one of the things I'm talking about when I'm thinking about when I talk about like find creative ways to like come to solutions, to solve problems, to come to compromises. There's a lot of like interesting, weird stuff you can put in there, right? That will just protect you and all the different levels. But yeah, I mean, like, so there's, you know, around the time Me Too came into the common lexicon, group, a Facebook group called Women Plus in Theater sprang up, and it's, you know, now multinational and it's just massive. And then out of that, somebody just started in a Google spreadsheet, a list of like what they did, what city they were in, how long they had done it, and how much they got paid. And it got, you know, just hundreds and hundreds, and, you know, was super sortable. So you could be like, okay, how much do lighting designers get paid in this area of the country? And at like what size venue, you know, that kind of shared information exists, but you have to do the like networking and connection building. But sometimes that networking and connection building is as simple as joining a Facebook group. But I would also encourage you, if you see those sort of spreadsheets, shared information, if you're comfortable, make sure you're sharing as much information as you can too, right? It goes both ways. Like you can help protect each other as well. Okay. Anything else? Y'all are so great. Was this useful? Okay. Sometimes I don't know. Yeah, and like I said, I'll put a bunch of different contract samples on the page tomorrow when I upload the video. But there's also a ton on Google. And I think particularly as like we emerge from the pandemic sometime next year, hopefully, yeah, the force majeure stuff will come into more focus, particularly in the arts world, because it was so brutal, particularly for performing artists. Like just performing artists and teaching artists were the hardest hit. And it was just like all of the stuff was just gone. It was like a light switched, right? So that's a good way to protect everybody, but also just to have, you know, clarity about what happens, right? You're basically disaster prepping. So that you're not dependent on like trying to negotiate and make decisions in the crisis. Cool. Okay. Thursday, we have a peer support artist call at noon on Zoom. Matt Garza and Anthony Andrade are leading this one. I'm super stoked about it. They're both multidisciplinary, just like wonderful artists and wonderful humans. They're both certified yoga practitioners, teachers, who have been doing a lot of work around physical and mental health care for all humans. So they're leading, the conversation is about self-care and mental health for artists. So they'll be doing a guided yoga and meditation sequence, and then a facilitated conversation about how we can all be taking care of ourselves as best as we can now. How we can make it through this dark, dark winter. Okay. How was y'all's Thanksgiving if you celebrate it? I'm gonna turn off the recording.